Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast, with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
and Maddie. Welcome back to the podcast, Godcast.
and also welcome you back.
Yes, I know. I want to name that in listening to the unedited version, whatever, of the episode before you guys published the one that I wasn't in, immediately it was less chaotic. So my presence at least was noted by me because the whole energy was just a little calmer.
But also slightly less laughter.
It's true.
That's true. That's shocking, knowing who I am as a person.
We are grateful that you are back.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be back. So this week is going to be a little bit different in that we are not going to be engaging a liturgy, which means there's not a link for you to click to follow along. You just kind of have to listen to us talk. I reserve the right to take back that there won't be any links if we talk about something and go, we should probably provide some links for some resources, which seems to be happening more and more. But we are indeed not engaging a liturgy. I realized, or we all kind of realized recently, we've never actually defined what we mean when we say liturgy or liturgical, and we thought it would be beneficial, fun, informative if we, for one another and for you, define what we mean when we use those words. Because I think a lot of times people say the words and they don't actually know what they mean, or they've heard the words and they just kind of have an assumption of what it means because they've only heard it in one context. And this is kind of a weird context. Not weird, special.
Unique.
Yeah.
Different.
Absolutely. All those things.
Gotta stop using words.
Okay, so liturgy. Who wants to tap in first?
Well, Hannah was saying something interesting earlier.
Yes.
Because we all Googled what does liturgy mean.
Yes. Okay, so prior to doing this episode, it appears that each of us sort of went to try to find an answer to the question, what is liturgy? And what I did is I spent a very long time looking through my seminary notebooks, my seminary papers, some of the books I read in seminary, and I could not find anything where either a definition of liturgy was provided to me or that I was made to define liturgy in anything that I wrote. And I was shocked. Liturgy showed up, but it was, as Maddie sort of said earlier, it just kind of just assumed we knew what that meant, but it was never clarified in anything.
Yeah, well, and even when we were first this summer starting to get ready to do this podcast and we were making Wayfolk Arts a little bigger and editing the website, I remember asking as we were crafting categories, because if you go to our website, there's a liturgical life blog, there's congregational prayers,
blessings, poems, etc.
Yeah, we have scripture enactments.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what... Because initially where it says Liturgical Life blogs, we just had liturgies in there. And I said, well, what do we mean when we say liturgies? Because I could put this poem here, but it should go in poems.
I wanted sacramental life.
That's right.
And we talked around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sacramental is, I think, in the conversation of liturgical.
Sure.
You want to say a little bit more about that kind of connection? I don't want to just jump on your idea and steal it.
I said sure to jump on with you, and I was still processing. I think I agree.
Sure.
Well, maybe okay. I'll say what I think I agree with. So when I think of sacramental life, what I'm thinking about is the way that I engage the goodness of God, or the goodness of God is presented to me, to those who experience through every thing. So when I think about, say, a cup of coffee in the morning, when I think about the way a carpet feels underneath my feet, when I think about, the goodness of creation, the goodness of God presented through creation, I'm often thinking in that way. And so when we think about liturgy, that's our often public expression of whether it's gratitude or experience or prayer for, or our engagement with, our dialogue with the goodness of God as presented in creation. Did that make sense?
I think so. It was very theological, but I really liked it.
Is that close to what you meant when you said that?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think like so kind of what I was thinking through before we were coming to this today was like, what are the kind of underpinnings or the roots of the use of the word liturgical, and then how has it evolved to its use today? And I think I'm sure there's an older one than this, but like if I go back in my history to the first time I heard liturgical, it was in connection with the liturgical calendar, which is a way for us to hear the good news in a regular scheduled way throughout the year, groundness, etc., in the story of Jesus, and the story as revealed through the gospel, the good news. However, I really like what you said, and I think that's more the beat or the movement that liturgical is moving into right now is the expression of the good news and the gospel and the God in all around us, suffusing all of life, all of creation. The move towards liturgical being able to note the sacramental and the presence of God in the cup of morning coffee, in the commute to work, in the moment on the road, not just in the liturgical calendar and the kind of scriptural journey that a church would go on in a year.
I'm going to add something to that. Because what you're describing, sort of as you said, is a shift in the meaning of liturgical that we're sort of experiencing in culture right now. And I think as I tried to do research for this earlier, liturgical, that word throughout its history has sort of specifically referred to worship, and especially communal worship, public worship.
No, but the second definition, I'll read it later.
Okay. But so I think the way it was used often in seminary, or you often hear in churches, is like, here's the liturgy for today's Sunday. Here's the liturgy for communion. It's sort of the outline, the structure, the format for the worship service or the moment in worship that we're going to engage. And we also use liturgy to describe like one particular piece, like so it can mean the entire worship service or one particular piece of the worship service. But the shift that Jackson is describing is sort of this move into worship and encounter with God, out through into the rest of life, into that cup of morning coffee. So it kind of becomes like it's still this communal connection. We, in our liturgies, or I'll claim that for myself. I don't currently remember what everyone else uses, but like still using communal pronouns like we, but it moves it beyond a worship service into everyday moments.
Well, and private moments.
Yeah.
It's not just public. It's your morning coffee, unless, I guess, if you're doing that publicly somehow, which...
At the diner.
Well, like at a coffee shop.
Sure. But, you know, I have mine in the 3 seconds that my child allows me to sit and drink it. A very holy moment in the morning. Privately. So, I read that definition on Google and I was like, oh, I actually didn't even think about how it could be classified as public, because a lot of my liturgical moments that feel meaningful to me are private ones, which makes sense that they would feel the most meaningful to me, because at least in my experience as someone who has worked in a worship context, the public liturgies, they're a job, right? I'm doing them for others, so I don't experience them as meaningfully. Don't come at me for that. Listeners, not you, Phil.
Oh, okay.
That's how often Phil comes at me.
You were
He
looking at
assumes.
me. You saw it.
But does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, I wonder if part of that piece in there is the a component of a liturgy, not the only component, but is also a word that you said right away at the beginning, Maddie, which is ritual. And the kind of communal ritual. Oftentimes the leader, I think we for sure have talked about this, I think back in maybe the Christmas episode or the Santa episode or something, how the leader of a communal ritual or liturgy or the enforcer of a tradition that was a little bit more violent than I intended.
I love it.
But the person who has to make sure it happens oftentimes doesn't experience the ritual in the same way. But on a personal level, if you engage in a ritual by yourself, that's very different. That's a very personal connection that is just for you,
or not. I mean, if I think for me, when I do individual, and I suspect for you too with your Celtic play, is part of that is joining into a communal ritual or liturgy through time and space, right?
Yeah.
It's not that there are actual people here with me in this moment, but I know that in this prayer I am joined, or I know that in the lighting of this candle, or or even just community within the Godhead kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that idea.
So then what isn't public and communal? If we want to go.
Yeah.
But
That's
one thing I
interesting,
wanted to add to the conversation, and I don't know if I hope it's not a tangent. I want it to be some of the frustration or language barrier I've had with liturgy is with folks who are from more like non-denom backgrounds who would say like, well, our church doesn't use liturgy. We don't have liturgy. So there's this assumed definition of liturgy being
Yes.
a particular script or
like an explicit script.
something that is older, that
The
has
phrase high liturgy is thrown
high
around.
liturgy. Yep.
It's
So
like
like when people talk
rigid.
about Hope Church Rides and they say, oh, it's a very liturgical church. And I know what they mean. But also your church is using liturgy. like you have this whole structure of worship that you do every week with your 3 songs and then, whatever, and then offering and then sermon. And then, I mean, like that's liturgy. So it's just, it does feel important that we put a label on our terms, but also how do we communicate that what we mean when we say this is not limited to maybe one person or one group of people's interpretation of the word.
Right.
Yeah. I think for me too, liturgy needs to be intentionally engaging something, whether it's the divine or, well, the divine for me, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think you could use liturgy in other contexts, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're speaking for a religious one. But there's intentionality behind it. I am reading this prayer. I am doing this ritual in an attempt to engage something beyond myself. I was thinking about like, what do I actually think of when I think of liturgy, other than the seminary answer that I think I'm supposed to give, which is engaging the divine. But I was thinking about like, it evokes. Oh no.
Evokes.
Wonder.
evocative.
It evokes wonder about myself, about the world, about what's going on in the moment. That phrase just kept coming back to me.
Yeah. I think, yes. And I think it for me also evokes intentionality around a moment and a longing for deeper presence to any particular moment.
Well, that maybe comes back to what Jackson was saying about the relationship between sacrament and liturgy is in high liturgy, old liturgy, whatever we want to call it. In our tradition, there's 2 sacraments, which would be baptism and communion, but there's more sacraments depending on your tradition. And really the way that we organize our church service kind of does the 4 sacraments, right? Like gathering and word and table and sending. And so our liturgy tends to be built around these expressions of what it is to be the people of God gathered in worship. The God who gathers, the God who teaches, the God who feeds, the God who sends. And if as we broaden our definition of sacrament, as we look for God, for the divine in more of our life, then that requests or asks or makes space for liturgy that does the same. Is that what you were saying
What I was saying?
earlier?
I don't remember.
I agree. I've decided that I actually do agree.
Full circle.
Nice. There's a kind of interesting thing that has happened in our conversation, and it's around that invoke evoke thing. And around
I did it on purpose.
yeah, nicely done. Because the two words that I think we've landed on using is engage, and engage the divine was the phrase that you used, and evoke a sense of something, versus invoke something or summon the divine or well, no, but that's an interesting beat that I think that I tend to write into my liturgies is a little bit more of a sense of waking up to something that is already happening. And so that evoking something, evoking a sense of awe, evoking a sense of wonder, engaging some God that is already always around.
Right. It's not magic words. We're not
Right.
casting a spell in order for something to happen.
Which perhaps there is a liturgical tradition
Sure.
that would be in that a little
Absolutely.
bit
Sure, the church I grew up in opens with the invocation.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think often, at least in my writing, it's more in that those E words, the evoking and engaging, than it is the other way.
So, as sort of a final thought to, or maybe of an invitation to each of us, a final word to
Or an
our listeners.
evocation.
Sure.
An Evite.
No, doesn't work the same way.
when we use liturgies on this podcast and in our blogs and stuff, what are some things we want people to assume about what we're saying? Invitation to each of us for these answers to be pithy.
Wait, I need you to say what you want from me again.
Okay. When we specifically, the four of us, use the word liturgy,
Got it.
what do we want our listeners or readers to assume?
Oh. I think the category of liturgy can be really gate kept
Ooh.
by churches, by individuals in churches. And by that I mean there's this assumption that it has to only be prayers, or it has to only be words spoken in a worship service. And I think a lot of that's anxiety based. I think that worship professionals are afraid that their jobs are going to be obsolete and they're freaking out.
Ooh. Preach.
But I'm right. I've witnessed it. I've been there. I experience it. I want it to be assumed that we're not gatekeeping what it can be. So we are trying to define liturgy, but I don't feel that I can define what liturgy is for you. I can only really define what it is for me. So if playing a board game is liturgy for you, cool. That's acceptable to me. If tying your shoe is liturgy for you, that's acceptable to me. I'm in a class right now and we read something about how like everything's become sacred and nothing is sacred. And I was like, that's everything can be sacred. Mm-hmm. Who gets to say what is and isn't? Certainly not me. I feel that way about liturgy as well. So if you want to submit a shoe tying poem and tell us that is how you evoke the divine or wonder or self-discovery in some way, can't wait to read it.
I'd bounce off that because for me, it's like the image is less gatekeepy and more like, I hope that what we put out there is like when you go to a parking lot with a bunch of chalk and you start drawing, not to be like, hey, everyone, this is the chalk art, you know, but it's like, hey, come and sit with me and color, you know, or putting crayons on a table and a bunch of paper and seeing what we do together. That by us playing in the playground, other people might come play and we get to be blessed by your pictures too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a resonative theme that I am hearing is the kind of broad stroke that we hope to create with with the broad welcome with this term. And I think that for me, anytime I'm writing something, I'm trying to wake up to something more going on around me. And I think that's how I tend to use liturgy, and I hope how you all receive either my talking about liturgy or my writing of liturgy is a chance to awaken to something that perhaps you've been asleep to, or a moment to claim the sacramental in the ordinary, or the realization that in the sacred and profane there is perhaps nothing at all that is truly profane, to borrow from Eliade. So
it's like mindfulness of the divine.
Yes.
Divinefulness.
Yeah. My answer
pretty good.
is just a yes and to all of that. I'm going to go back to the 2 words I used before, that I think when we say, here's a liturgy for you, the thing that we mean is, here is an intentionally crafted moment that we hope brings about deeper presence, deeper connection, in whatever way that looks like.
I'd really love also to read for all of you the second definition of liturgy.
Do we need to name the source?
www.google.chrome. W is what I was saying. No, W. Wait, how do you say the name of the letter?
W.
Is it W?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
there's 2
Yes.
U's in it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Why isn't it double V? We're done.
Actually, in German, it's
Double V? Okay.
Double V.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I just type into Google Chrome. In ancient Greece, a public office or duty performed voluntarily by a rich Athenian.
Athenian.
Damn it. Dang it. I'm so sorry.
You're good.
Oh, you know what? I also want you to assume you can use bad words in your liturgy, and it is good and sometimes right.
How good is it?
So good. Did we define it?
I think so. I think we did.
I think so.
Amen.
We described what we mean when we say it.
If we say amen
In a very
liturgically, we're
shenanigan-y way.
done.
It's true.
That's all for now, folks.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Liturgical Shenanigans. If you are a fan of the show, like these conversations, are enjoying our kind of delightful wandering through the field of liturgical shenanigans, we'd love for you to tell folks about the podcast. If you are listening to this podcast, you likely know at least 1 or 2 other people that would have a fun time listening to it as well. And hey, if they start listening to it, you can talk about it to someone. So if you have a chance to share this around to your friends, to your family, we'd really appreciate it. We also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Wayfolk Arts, which is the kind of larger umbrella under which Liturgical Shenanigans rests. And at patreon.com/Wayfolk Arts, you get a lot of cool stuff. You get patron-only posts. You get access to the after show of this podcast, which I'm excited for us to kind of jump into here in a minute here.
Sometimes we debate about Santa Claus.
It's true.
It's true.
You can go back and listen to that.
That's where the swear words are.
It's true.
Because
It's
there were
true.
none here.
Right.
All sorts of after show shenanigans for the patrons. So there's a bunch of different tiers. You can head on over there and see the different tiers of it. But for the lowest tier, you get access to the after show. You get access to patron-only posts, all sorts of good stuff.
Also, if you're listening, whether you choose to join as a patron or not, we know you're there because we see the numbers that exist, but we'd also just love to hear from you and how you're experiencing the podcast, how you I don't know, how it shows up in your everyday life. If you have things you would love for us to comment on or
Why
talk
we're
about.
wrong.
Yeah, tell us we're wrong. I love that.
Tell us what it evokes in you.
Yeah. Let us know you're out there.
Yeah.